Hey there everyone, and welcome back to Afrodo Reviews. On this channel I help you decide. Is that book worth reading over second breakfast? Or does it deserve the fiery pits of Mount Doom? That's what we're here to decide. Against the Twilight is the latest Donald James Parker book we will be reading today. It was published on January 21st of 2010, and is DJP's book where he angrily shakes his fist at and rants against the dreaded scourge, Twilight. You know, all things considered, this should really be a slam dunk for Donald James Parker, right? I mean, it's Twilight. The wealth of things you can criticize about the story is massive. You can critique the romanticization of abusive behavior, including the runaway codependency issues and the stalker-like behavior. You could talk about the appropriation of a real-life Native American tribe to put into your books, and then making something as disgusting as grooming as part of their culture. That's treated as a beautiful thing. Donald James Parker is even a writer who has 10 books underneath his belt at the time he wrote this story. So he could critique things like a flat, passive protagonist, the lack of character growth throughout the series, the fact that the story has large portions where nothing really happens, it's just constant... Okay, well, never mind. Donald James Parker definitely wouldn't be able to critique that one. That's actually probably something he'd praise, because it's not as bad as his. But still, slam dunk case, right? How could you possibly go wrong with critiquing something like...
You know, it's said that Lord Radigan harbored a secret.
What was that, Turtle Pope? He openly admits that he's never read the books. He only hates Twilight because it has vampires in it and literally nothing else. In fact, it should be abundantly clear he never once read a single book by Stephenie Meyer or knows the slightest thing about her. Why do I keep repeating everything you're whispering in my ear? Anyways, yeah, if you haven't been able to tell, Against the Twilight is nothing more than an ignorant old man shaking his fist at something he doesn't understand, doesn't want to understand, so he hides behind his religion so he never has to understand. So we're about to read a story where an old man hides in the corner, screams incoherently at the Twilight series for 194 pages. And I'm not gonna lie to you guys, the story was weirdly enjoyable at times. But before we begin, let me read you the back of the book and tell you what the synopsis pretends it's about. I say the back of the book, but what I really mean is the Goodreads profile, because I don't really have a back of the book because I'm not paying for these books, so I'm getting them online. I'm paying for them, but not in the way that I directly give Donald James Parker money. Heather has reached the pinnacle of the publishing world through weaving suspenseful plots and romantic novels featuring vampires. She's the toast of the town to most, but to David, her fiction threatens to toast a whole generation of readers in the broiler of hell. He writes his own book to enlighten the world about the dangers and evil of vampire glorification. He and Heather appear to be perfect candidates for a fierce war of words, but the ardor for battle is diminished by their mutual attraction. Despite their attempts to squelch the magnetic pull, their chemistry causes romance to bubble underneath the surface through all of the twists and turns of their adversarial relationship. While Heather's mother schemes to get the two together, an old gentleman at a nursing home attempts to set David up with Cindy, a nurse at the home. Cindy's beauty falls short of Heather's, but her spiritual beauty surpasses and grows as she places her love for David on the altar and focuses on worshiping God rather than one of his creatures. As David's life of service to God poses continual challenges, he struggles to deal with a romantic tug-of-war which threatens to paralyze him and unravel the tapestry of his ministry. As a man who communes with God on a daily basis, he receives the word from the Lord that he needs to trust all will be well. He does trust when faced with a dangerous situation on the streets, but finds allowing God to safeguard his heart to be a tougher assignment. And somehow, Donald James Parker managed something really amazing with this. He has a synopsis that at one point tells you too much, but at the same time tells you nothing at all. Like, the synopsis just flat out spoils Cindy's subplot, but that subplot is so irrelevant to the book, it might as well not be there. And it also lies to you about parts of a subplot, because the old man that tries to hook Cindy up with David doesn't try to do so until she's already completed her journey into not having a crush on David anymore. Therefore, the old man's not actually trying to hook her up with David. The old man is coming in later, not realizing the scenario that already happened. And the whole point where David writes his own book, that's nothing. It really is nothing. So at no point does it matter. Honestly, I'm just going to go ahead and just ignore everything I just said to you. The real story of this book is about how a Stephenie Meyer Exby, who in the book is named Heather Culebra, but I'm going to refer to as Stephenie Meyer so you truly understand how weird this book really is harassed religiously by a man named David Justice. Yes, that's really his name. Which I'm sure Donald James Parker was just like, yes. Oh, yeah. Yeah, that's... I'm brilliant for that name. And of course, like all Donald James Parker books, DJP defeats his intellectual opponent not by relying on any actual arguments or anything like that, but solely through his animal-like charisma to seduce them back to the Lord. Or, well, very specifically, his version of the Lord. Because in this story, there are multiple people who are already Christians that he comes into conflict with because, in Donald James Parker's mind, they're not Christian enough for him. There's not a doubt in my mind that David Justice is Donald James Parker's self-insert throughout this book. It's actually a little funny. The fact that he wrote Forrest Valkyrie getting seduced by his daughter is pretty par for the course for apparently how Donald James Parker thinks he can take care of people who don't agree with him, and he knows he can never beat in an actual debate. Valkyrie should just be grateful that DJP has a strong case of homophobia, or Beauty and the Atheist might have been a very, very different story. Speaking of weird kinks, I will be exclusively referring to God as Eternal Daddy from now on. After all, I do want to be a Christian, and by DJP's own words, God is Eternal Daddy. And I really do hate to say it, but I think the book reveals a little too much about what Donald James Parker has for kinks that I was perfectly happy never knowing, and now am very hurt because I've had to draw the connection. Anyways, I'm not really talking much about the story because the story itself is sort of all over the place. On paper, it sounds like it's going to be a book about Donald James Parker and Stephenie Meyer have a televised debate about the efficacy of vampire literature and how it interacts with the Bible. But maybe about 40 pages or so are actually about this, and that's honestly really highballing it by just assuming that anything to do with Stephenie Meyer and Donald James Parker's character is to do with this when it really isn't. Now, as a book, it is leagues better than Gramps Goes to College, even though it has a lot of the same issues. Characters are still very flat and have no voice, clearly all just mouthpieces for Donald James Parker to make his various points. Literally to the point that Donald James Parker forgets that his main character is 28 and repeatedly has him act like a 58-year-old man and a 12-year-old child, respectively. But I say it's better for two main reasons. One, it's about a subject that is far more subjective than evolution versus the Eternal Daddy. Secondly, technically three. Secondly, I would also say that the book is more competently written. I had noticed far less typos in this one. This book was actually numbered instead of just having various locations. The story was written like a book first, and then probably going to be a movie second. I don't know if he ever plans to make this into a movie. That being said, there are definitely scenes in here where it's kind of like, Donald, did you really think about the sentence when you put it in? Because at one point, a character jokes about how his self-insert character must be beating off ladies with a stick because of how awesome and handsome and smart he is. And obviously all the women want that, even though he constantly judges women. And he says, no, actually, it's quite the opposite. I still have the bruises to prove it. Donald, you do realize the opposite of a man beating off ladies with a stick who want him is ladies have to beat him off with a stick because he won't leave them alone. I know this book and several other of your works show that you have very weird ideas of what constitute romance, but even you can't think it's okay to say, oh yeah, no, my character is such a hound dog, ladies literally have to beat him. Let me rephrase that. My character is such a hound dog, ladies literally have to fight him off because he won't leave him alone. So again, I know what you were going for, but actually no, I don't. What was he going for in this? Because it's true, ladies do have to. He is basically hiding his. Oh, I'll get more into this later, but he is basically like to all the ladies coming at him. So the third reason is why I think this book is far more enjoyable of a read rather than just being a better written book. And that's because the subplots of this book are fucking wild. No, seriously, in this book, David Justice literally goes out and fights a pimp. You didn't hear me wrong. This story starts with Eternal Daddy ordering him to go out and buy a hooker, and it ends with Donald James Parker using Eternal Daddy as a stand to fight a pimp. Again, just to be clear, I am not kidding. The scene is nuts. Donald gets down, prays to Eternal Daddy, and gets told, hey, go buy some blowing hookers. So he goes, finds an underage hooker, buys her time, thinks he's super clever by not at all reassuring this underage woman forced into this kind of work by speaking in super vague, suggestive terms that implies he's definitely not here to help her, before eventually getting to his home and making her pray. But once this super basic thing is done, he calls her dad, who plans to fly down, and then after the dad says, oh, I'm gonna come get my daughter, he grabs his phone, dials up his cop phone, and is like, I know I said I'd retire after the last time, but one more mission. But in the span of a couple hours, DJP's friend, Mac, suits him up for an undercover sting where he's supposed to go up to the pimp, get him to admit to being a pimp so his friend can arrest him. So naturally, DJP immediately abandons that plan within seconds of leaving the van, goes right up to the pimp, and begins to reveal details of a murder he knows that man committed. Unamused by this fool who's daring to step to him, the pimp pulls out a gat and then tries to put a cap in Donald's ass, only for the Eternal Daddy himself to appear and catch the bullets with his hand. Move aside, starving child in Africa. God has to protect this upper middle class white man while he plays hero. Then, after the cops gun down the pimp, Donald James Parker literally is like, my work here is done, and strolls off into the night. Several notes. One, pretty sure stings aren't set up that fast unless they absolutely have to be, and they definitely wouldn't send an untrained civilian in alone to do it. Two, Donald, you do realize that you had your character in this scene not only admit to buying an underage prostitute, but also reveal the details to a murder that he should know nothing about, including the intimate details at the time of death for that victim. Call me crazy, but I'm pretty sure most cops won't be like, oh, well, the Eternal Daddy told him all that. That's how he knows. He wasn't there. As a defense. 3, I think when a cop says, hey, I need to talk to the actual victim of the crime before I do anything, your response, it cannot be, nah, I'm going to send her home to a different state on a plane tomorrow. We'll do this by myself. It's like Donald only knows how police work through extremely inaccurate portrayals on TV. Like he's not watching Law and Order or even stuff like The Mentalist or anything like that. He's watching a B-rated movie where even fucking Dirty Harry would look at them and be like, God, you guys need to follow protocol. Now, this is by far the most humorous instance of this, but it's by no means the only time I read this book and was just like, wow. Like I said earlier, I'm pretty sure I figured out one of Donald James Parker's kinks. It's something I was cursed to realize, and now I'm passing on the curse to you. Don't you click ahead. I see you. You're staying for this. If I have to know it, you do too. And that's it. I think Donald James Parker has a real corruption purity kink. Now, before I get to Fenders, let me just put this out there. Donald James Parker has a 28-year-old man act like a scared 12-year-old kid from a satire sketch about abstinence. Like, literally, you know how awkwardly he acts in Gramps Goes to College when he writes the biology professor coming on to him? Amplify that by 10 since we actually get to see his thoughts in this book. He has a nightmare, and by that I mean he literally calls it a nightmare, about a woman who's super into him getting into his bed and being like, "Hey, handsome, you want to have sex?" And then, when the extremely pretty, which the book is sure to remind you of repeatedly, Stephenie Meyer puts on a revealing dress to seduce him during a Thanksgiving dinner, he literally runs back from the house. Back, Satan! Back! And then when he comes back by Stephanie's house later, shortly after, he literally thinks about how the last time he was here, he barely escaped with his chastity and purity. And it's like, Jesus, dude. I don't know. I mean, I don't know how to comment on these scenes without laughing at you. Like, I made a joke how he could crush walnuts up there, but at this point, I think he's wearing a fucking chastity belt. Now again, as I said before, you might realize that I'm speaking entirely about various things that happen through the book and not at all about the actual main plot of the book. That is because and that plot is he's trying to convert the queen of vampire fiction herself over to his religion. By the way, Donald, since you seem to keep using this as a defense, religion is not the specific church you go to. It's the broader category of it overall. You can't say that you're not trying to convert people to religion by adding that disclaimer that you don't mean your specific church, when you clearly are trying to convert them to your sect of Christianity. That's what people mean when they say you're trying to convert them to religion. Anyways, the reason I haven't been talking about that is, well, the book isn't really focused on that. Again, it's a series of random subplots that occasionally remind you, oh yeah, this is about condemning Twilight. Here's Stephenie Meyer thinking incredibly racist things about her bodyguard. It's honestly the worst part of the book too, because it has several of the trappings DJP has in his works and his beliefs. For example, if you've been exposed to enough of his works, you know that DJP believes that if you're doing anything that specifically goes against his religion, he immediately tries to imply that you're doing it solely for monetary gain and or fame as a way to undermine any potential defense you had against him. For some reason, Stephenie Meyer being proud of writing best-selling books is meant to show her as a terrible, vain person, since he immediately turns that pride into arrogance any chance he gets. Like I said, she walks around an airport thinking incredibly racist things about her bodyguard. She insists that her word is law because of her popularity, so on, so on. But don't fret, no character in this book is particularly likable. All of them are really awful people, so unfortunately Stephenie Meyer, despite all this, still comes off as one of the more reasonable people, if still very unlikable. But that's another thing to discuss. Donald immediately challenged Stephenie Meyer to a debate in this book. For some reason, in this world, a best-selling author who has multiple movies coming out bothers herself with one random guy who stalked her and condemned her to hell in the 2 conversations they had, and agrees to set up a live debate with him on a TV show. This is the part where DJP's self-publishers show the most, as she calls her publicist and sets it up, and not only would I think that's more of a job for an agent, and I might be wrong, but a reasonable publicist would have immediately been like, no, Stephenie, I'm not going to let you debate a random Christian author who walked up to you on live TV. No, there's literally nothing for you to gain. It's entirely for his benefit. Plus, if you do this, every nut job with a Christian book is going to want to do the same thing for free publicity. No, Stephanie, we can't make your bodyguard crawl on all fours. No, in DJP's world, the publicist is immediately like, everyone hating Christianity is the new hot topic, so it's sure to promote your books. I'll set it up right away. The debate is about as boring as any other time that DJP stands up and rants in any of his other movies. In DJP's mind, him making a single sports metaphor completely converts the moderator of the debate so that she blatantly ignores the best-selling author she has on her show in order to gush over the religious fundamentalist who just wants to preach. And once more, Donald's whole method of arguments are incredibly disingenuous. For example, let's take one of his arguments. David Justice, during this debate, once more uses a Pascal's wager, but converts it more for books. He argues that is it really worth reading vampire books when you could just read any other number of books out there, likening it to if he told you that eating cantaloupe would cause cancer, and you refuse to stop eating it despite having thousands of other options for food. Let's actually take a deeper look at his argument. Using the Guardian's top 100 books of all time, we'll use the 2002 version, since that probably would have been the one DJP most likely would be familiar with when he wrote this book. But let's consider his argument. Alright, these are the 100 books on the Guardian's 2002 100 best books of all time. Since the Bible passage that Donald is using to condemn vampires is from Leviticus, we'll use Leviticus specifically to see what books would actually be allowed to be read, according to DJP's worldview. First, let's obviously apply the line about blood. Now, would you look at that? 2 books removed already. Okay, well, let's go for a hardball one. Let's go ahead and apply the adultery condemnations. Any work that doesn't sufficiently punish adultery as the Bible orders should obviously be removed as well, right? Because it would then be, according to Donald James Parker's own views, would be raising up adultery as something that's perfectly viable. Woo! Look at that go. Okay, well, what's that leave us with? Oh, well, DJP is super against anything that involves witchcraft, wizardry, and any kind of magic that is not specifically holy. So let's go ahead and take a look at what that would remove as well. Woo! Damn, that was a lot. Wow. Okay, well, so then obviously we have to go and look out for anything that he tells us not to eat, since of course, blood being eaten is also something you're not allowed. So obviously he must think anything that the Bible explicitly forbids you from eating should also be removed. And what that leaves, that's like shellfish, clams, oysters, urchins, lobsters, cats, dogs, ferrets, snails, moles, weasels, mice, rats, bugs, insects, worms, spiders, roaches, and, obviously animal fat in general. Since Donald James Parker is such a good Christian who can't abide by vampires because they consume blood, surely he'd also hate any book that has moments in it where characters consume these things without them being explicitly condemned for doing so. Okay, well, obviously, since we're such sticklers for rules here, clearly Donald James Parker would also be against the rule in Leviticus where it tells you can't cut the hair around your temples or around your beard. So let's go ahead and remove any book that has that in it as well. Okay, well, you know what? This is taking a bit, so let's just go ahead and remove any book that violates any of the laws of Leviticus in general right now. Things like idolatry, blasphemy, anything that's not explicitly condemning, deception, lies, cheating. Oh, and obviously we've got to remove anything that shows characters holding a grudge or seeking revenge without being explicitly condemned. So how many books does that actually leave us with? Wait, what? No, there has to be something. I swear to God, I saw the Divine Comedy on that list, and... Okay, well, yeah, that is true. I do suppose there's a point in the book where Dante personally insults Filippo Argenti and expresses delight at seeing him attacked in hell, and the story arguably presents this anger as righteous, so that would definitely violate the law of Leviticus about holding personal grudges, right? But I mean, there was also the book of Job. Really? That's a Bible story, isn't it? Oh, Well, no, I guess Job does shave his head in mourning at one point, which naturally would probably include the sides of his temple, which naturally include the sides of his head and the hair at his temple, which would violate Leviticus law as well. I'll be honest, it's starting to look like by DJP's strict creationist standard, it wouldn't just be a single fruit in the sea of food we're not allowed to eat, but rather the metaphor should be completely reversed. As if we're being told we're only allowed to eat cantaloupe because we're being told everything else is going to cause us cancer. Unless, of course, Donald is going to say he can pick and choose which of the Leviticus passages he can choose to follow. Interesting. Personally, though, I think the whole conversion of Stephenie Meyer is kind of gross. And that's going beyond the fact that if DJP had actually read any of the books he claims to hate, he'd find that they had actually more supporting of his worldviews than being against it. But no, he really wants to embarrass Stephenie Meyer in this book. In addition to portraying her as a sad, lonely woman who's arrogantly looking down on anyone, but desperately just needs a man to hold her tight and put her in her place, how he actually has her convert to his version of the Eternal Daddy is wild. You see, Stephenie Meyer, after having a debate with her bodyguard / friends with benefit, Hercules, again, very subtle Donald, crashes her car on her way to a resort. And then she's stuck at the bottom of the cliff for about 3 days. Kind of weird to me that the only way Donald thinks he could convince someone to truly convert religions, who, mind you, again, in this book is already Christian, just not his version of Christian, is that she has to be starved, dehydrated, and absolutely humiliated for 3 days straight. But he also makes sure to bring explicit attention to the fact that she has to piss and shit herself. Which, again, why? Like, look, I get it. In real life, that would be true. And you could easily just imply this based on common sense. She's stuck there for 3 days. Obviously, she had to go somewhere. This is just one of those things, like, the fact you bring specific attention to the fact that Stephenie Meyer has to imagine herself in a diaper to pee her pants and then proceeds to shit herself later, it brings up more questions, Donald. It's like in the same book where he has his character looking over Stephenie Meyer's old pictures, and he makes it a point to specify, when I got to the teenager and child pictures, I was not sexually aroused by them. And it's kind of one of those, yeah, most normal people would assume that, Donald. The fact that you brought specific attention to it is what's weird. This is like if you serve someone a pie and then immediately said, oh, don't worry, I didn't put any of my hair in it. The fact you felt the need to specify that is going to make people think, so there's hair in my pie. And also, are we going to address the fact that Eternal Daddy was 100% going to let Stephenie die if his starving her out plan didn't work? Like, the second she converts, he sends a vision to her mother to save her, which means he could have done that all along. Which means God is not all loving because he was like flat out like, oh, you don't believe in me? Well, I guess you'll enjoy being at the bottom of that ravine. Huh. What was that? Oh, did you say God help me? I'm not sure I believe it. Alright, I'm gonna figure out who's yelling so much. By the way, if you guys are curious why I've been recording out there, this is why. Look, I've had puppies for the past few weeks. So they're where I normally do my videos. Mwah. Also, this whole section where Stephenie Meyer is missing really goes to show that Donald does not know how to treat people in a state of emergency. Stephenie Meyer crashes a car and knows she's stuck. Her phone is just out of reach. And mind you, it's December, which means it's the coldest month, or close to the coldest month. So, knowing she's trapped and her phone is right there, what does she do? Well, I guess it's a good time to work on my latest book in my head. Someone's bound to find me eventually, right? Her mother, who, by the way, Donald literally converts to his version of Christianity after a 90-minute conversation. Mind you, we don't see any of the conversation. It's just like, bring me your Bible. I'm going to show you something important. 90 minutes later, her mother is like, oh my God, I've been wrong this whole time. Please forgive me, Eternal Daddy. But her mother shows very little worry about her missing daughter. She lets people talk her out of calling the cops when she first finds out Stephanie is missing, then being like, let's boogie, when she's gonna go leave the house to search for her missing daughter. And after receiving what she believes to be a divine message from God where Stephanie is missing, where Stephanie has gone missing too, she starts going out to her car before stopping and saying, well, you know what? I think we need some snacks for the road. I'll be right back. And then going back to get snacks. And then when they think they found the spot where Stephanie might have crashed, and again has been missing for 3 days in December, her mother's like, oh, here's the road. You know what? It's a little late. Like, you know what? We could just go to this nearby resort, get some rooms. We'll pick this up in the morning. It'll be fine. It has to be told by David Justice. It's like, no. We're going to search today. What are you, fucking nuts? And of course, you know, I know for a fact I would totally be coherent after a major car crash and 3 days of dehydration and starvation to be making jokes about Kermit the Frog and Nat King Cole. Who the fuck is Nat King Cole? What a dated reference. And then after Stephanie Meyer's rescue turned into a Christian that fits DJP's standards, he decides it's finally fine to boink her, and the book becomes the most boring thing ever. I want to say the book ends with Stephanie being saved and then truly converting in the hospital, but there's a couple... We both know, first of all, that didn't end. I want to say that's the end of this review, but there are a couple of writing decisions I also want to talk about. First of all, Donald, you look like a fucking ass for how you wrote Cindy. You literally implied that this lady is fat and unattractive because she didn't believe in God enough. So you have your character lead this fictional character on for several days, and instead of just letting him be honest and not finding her physically attractive. By the way, fun fact about Donald, apparently he does not consider lies of omission or half-truths lies. Interesting thing. Instead, and then when she finally does think she got him on the first date, he waits till the end of that first date and says, no, you're a little too fat for me. I don't really fuck that way. And then he has the audacity to blame Cindy for being hurt and angry with him, and basically have the book scold her for not being godly enough to accept rejection and just be his friend like he really wanted. Dude, you wasted her fucking time. You led her on and wasted her time. She's allowed to be upset with you. And you don't even really have a reason to not like her. You don't even talk about... Literally, the reason he gives in the book, because Donald James Parker wants to pretend he doesn't judge people for being fat. One of the reasons he gives in the book is like, well, I don't look at her and instantly love her, so obviously she's not the woman for me. But the other one is a more genuine writing problem that I would say is just a pure... It's more on the objective side of things, personally. And that's that. And that's it. Donald James Parker's worlds are impossibly small. And I mean that purely in the scope. You see, there's a dozen or so similar subplots here, and they all connect for no reason at all. You see, Stephanie's mom has a friend named Tessa, who's married to a guy named Chris, who happens to be David Justice's best friend. And when they take him to a prayer group run by the guy named Stan, who DJP talked out of suicide by saying, okay, but have you thought about God? Who just so happens to meet a long-lost love of his named Flo from across the country he thought he would never see again, only to find out Stephanie's mother's biological parents are Stan and Flo, who gave her up for adoption after they had premarital sex and wasn't able to bear the shame of raising a child born out of wedlock. Like, literally, there's not one side character in the story that does not end up connected to another side character in any way. Which, by the way, I really love how human these characters act. A character named Flo walks up that matches every description Stan has given of his long-lost love, Flo. Sees Stephanie's mother, looks at her and is like, huh, you look oddly familiar. Where are you from? Oh, I'm from here. And she passes out, and not a single person is like, the fuck was that about? They're just like, huh, that was weird. Well, while the nurses are carting her off to the room, let's start discussing something completely unrelated. I really cannot go on much longer about this book, or I'll be here for another hour ranting about the various stuff in this book. There's so many small things I could rant about. Overall, I think I have to give Against the Twilight a 4 out of 10. The book really is so bad it's good that at the various points in the book, David Justice fighting Pimps using Eternal Daddy as his stand was entertaining in all the right ways that Donald did not intend. Watching Donald go about his world with his superhero OC and doing all this shit he clearly wishes he could do in real life and living vicariously through it is such a dumb, fun idea that's also kind of pathetic in a funny way that I really have no other word for it. It's just fun. However, the sad part is most of the actual part involving Twilight in this book is the most boring, creepy thing out there. Let's just say the guys that at god-awful movies aren't wrong when they told Forrest Valkai that Donald probably doesn't intend to write the Forrest's XP and Beauty and the Atheist as creepy, but he genuinely thought Trey was being genuinely romantic. Or at the very least justified in how he acted creepy towards Donald's daughter. If I did recommend you this book, it would probably be with a disclaimer that it's safe to stop reading at about 160 pages in. That's when Stephenie Meyer converts and is saved, and she's going to marry the handsome hunk who stalked her and called her a godless woman and an agent of Satan, but was just so handsome that she completely ignored every single one of those. And after that, the book is just should have just ended, but continues on for another 30 pages. And for the most part, it's just about Stephenie Meyer being like, yes, I was wrong to write about vampires and will exclusively write about the glory of God from now on. And it's even better because at one point she's like, oh, this is going to ruin my writing career. And Donald's like, no, it won't. You'll just find a new audience. And it's like, no, Donald, she absolutely would ruin her writing career. You don't think of fucking the publishing companies and all these fucking companies making her movies are going to go after her when she starts going out there? It's like, don't read my books. They're evil. After that, the book could have just ended, but again, continues on for 30 pages. And the book makes you feel every single one of those pages crawling along. That whole subplot with Donald fighting a pimp with God with the Eternal Daddy as his stand, that's in the first 40 pages. And it's juxtaposed by the first 20 pages being about Stephenie Meyer. Overall, this is a mixed recommendation. If I had to tell you to choose between Gramps Goes to College and this, I definitely recommend this, but it's not something I recommend over any other so bad it's good book. It's so bad it's good in a few places, not the entirety of the book like some others. Like Doom. With that being said, I really don't have much else to say, so, yeah. I'll see y'all later. Just remember, with every book comes an adventure, and every adventure's worth having. The world! I don't know how to end this. Goodbye.